The call came through on the emergency frequency at 0347 hours. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Contractor flight C-17, engines out, going down. Grid coordinates, follow. I was suiting up for a routine patrol when the combat search and rescue alert sounded. Our platoon scrambled. Boots, gear, weapons, helmets, everything moving with the precision we'd drilled 10,000 times. The voice on the radio gave coordinates deep in hostile territory, 40 clicks from our forward operating base. Bad terrain. Worse timing. We had 90 minutes until sunrise when enemy patrols would make extraction nearly impossible. My squad leader looked at me. "Martinez, your lead on tactical approach. Get them out clean." I nodded, already running scenarios. What I didn't know yet, what wouldn't register until we were wheels up in the Blackhawk with the wind screaming through the open doors, was that the downed aircraft's manifest included civilian contractors. One of them was my father, the same man who'd spent 3 years telling anyone who'd listen that his daughter joining the infantry was a waste of taxpayer money because women couldn't handle real combat. The same man who'd stopped coming to family dinners after I deployed because he couldn't stand to hear people call me brave. He was about to find out exactly what his daughter could handle. And I was about to save his life without him ever knowing I'd been the one on the other end of that rescue. I have never told my father that I was the team leader who pulled him out of that crash site, not during his recovery, not at the ceremony where they honored the rescue, not during the 5 years since. Some people keep secrets out of spite. I kept mine out of strategy, because my father doesn't respond to arguments. He responds to undeniable proof. And sometimes the most powerful proof is the kind you never claim credit for. My training instructor taught me that in my first week at infantry school. She was a woman who'd done 3 combat tours before most of my male classmates had graduated high school. She never argued when people questioned whether women belonged in combat roles. She just outperformed them, then let the record speak. "Don't waste energy defending your right to be here," she'd said during a particularly brutal ruck march when several of us were struggling under the weight. "Just be so good they can't ignore you. Document your performance. Let the work speak louder than their doubts." I'd carried that lesson through every phase of training. Through Ranger School, where I was one of 2 women in a class of 47. Through deployment, where my platoon treated gender like it was irrelevant because competence made it so. My father knew I'd deployed. He knew I'd made sergeant ahead of schedule. What he didn't know was that I'd been running point on high-risk operations for 8 months, that my squad had a perfect record on extractions, that when Central Command needed a precision team for personnel recovery in contested areas, they called us first. He didn't know because I'd stopped trying to convince him, stopped sending him updates about promotions or commendations, stopped arguing when he'd make comments at family gatherings about how the military had lowered standards to accommodate women, how real combat wasn't like training, how putting women in infantry roles endangered the men who had to compensate for their weaknesses. I just smiled, said nothing, and kept my after-action reports in a folder at the base. Documented, dated, verified. Waiting for a moment I couldn't have predicted, but somehow knew would come. That moment arrived at 0347 on a Tuesday morning when a C-17 carrying defense contractors lost both engines over hostile territory, and the only rescue team close enough to reach them before enemy forces did was my all-female platoon. The brief was fast. Downed aircraft, 7 personnel including crew. 2 injured, status unknown. Crash site in a valley with minimal cover, insurgent activity heavy in the region. Window for extraction approximately 90 minutes before daylight made the area a kill zone. Our mission: secure the perimeter, assess casualties, extract all personnel, return to base. Standard CSAR protocol. Nothing we hadn't trained for. The Blackhawk lifted off 6 minutes after the alert. My squad, 8 women, each one cross-trained in combat medicine, tactical communication, and close quarters engagement. We'd worked together for 11 months. I knew their breathing patterns in combat. They knew mine. Corporal Diaz, our medic, was already reviewing triage protocols. Specialist Kim was checking ammunition counts. Private First Class Washington had the radio, coordinating with air support. The pilot, Captain Rhodes, another woman who'd been flying combat missions since before half our squad had enlisted, gave us the update through our headsets. Crash site confirmed. No fire, no explosion. Aircraft intact but immobile. Enemy patrol spotted 3 clicks northeast moving toward the site. We have a narrow window. I looked at my squad. Every face was focused, calm. This was what we did. Gender never entered the equation when rounds were coming down range. The helicopter dropped fast into the valley, rotors loud enough to announce our presence to anyone within a mile. That was calculated. We wanted the enemy to know we were there, to hesitate long enough for us to secure the site. The moment we touched ground, we moved. Standard dispersal pattern. Diaz and Kim to the aircraft to assess casualties. Washington establishing communication perimeter. The rest of us creating a defensive line between the crash and the direction of the enemy patrol. The C-17 sat at an angle, one wing crumpled, cargo door partially open. As I approached, I could hear voices inside. Scared, shaken, but alive. I signaled to Diaz. She climbed in first, medical kit ready. I followed. The interior was chaos, equipment scattered, seats torn from their bolts, 7 people in various states of shock and injury. The pilot had a head wound but was conscious. The co-pilot had a broken arm. 4 contractors were bruised but mobile. And then I saw him, my father, sitting against the bulkhead, holding his ribs, blood streaking from a cut above his eye. He looked up when I entered, looked right at me. For a second I thought he'd recognize me, but my face was painted, helmet low, night vision goggles obscuring half my features. He saw a soldier, not his daughter. "How many injured?" I asked, voice clipped and professional. Diaz answered without looking up from her assessment of the pilot. 2 urgent, 3 ambulatory, 2 mobile with assistance. Time? 6 minutes since we landed. I activated my radio. Insertion complete. 7 souls accounted for. Preparing for extraction. Confirm air support window. Washington's voice came back immediately. Enemy patrol diverted east. Window holding at 73 minutes before sunrise. Not enough time to waste. I turned to the contractors. "Can you walk?" 3 nodded. My father tried to stand, grimaced, sat back down. "Ribs," he managed. "Possible fracture or break." Diaz moved to him, hands efficient. "Sir, I need to stabilize you for transport. This will hurt." He nodded, didn't complain. I'd never seen my father scared before. He'd always been the loudest voice in every room, the man with opinions about everything and everyone. Now, sitting in a crashed aircraft in hostile territory, he was quiet, focused on survival, letting a woman half his age tell him what to do, because in that moment, her expertise was the only thing keeping him alive. Diaz wrapped his chest, gave him something for the pain, then looked at me. "He can move with support." I gestured to Kim. "Get him to the bird. Careful on the uneven ground." Kim, 5'4" and strong enough to deadlift twice her body weight, helped my father stand. He leaned on her, every step controlled. I watched them exit the aircraft, my father's life literally in the hands of a woman he'd probably dismiss as too small for combat if he met her at a barbecue. Outside, my squad had the perimeter locked. Washington was calling updates. The rest of the team was moving the mobile contractors toward the helicopter in pairs, weapons ready, eyes scanning for threats. This was the part civilians never understood about combat. It wasn't about individual strength. It was about coordinated action. Every member of my squad knew her role and trusted everyone else to know theirs. The pilot and co-pilot were the last we moved. Both needed stretchers. Diaz and I carried the pilot, my father watching from near the Black Hawk as we loaded her aboard. His expression was unreadable. Pain, maybe. Shock, definitely. Maybe something else. Respect? Recognition of competence? I couldn't tell and didn't have time to analyze it. 61 minutes to sunrise, Washington called. Enemy patrol turned back this direction, 3 clicks out. We had to move. I did a final sweep of the crash site, confirming nothing, classified or sensitive, was left behind. Then I boarded the Black Hawk, pulled my father's handler up behind me, and signaled to Captain Rhodes. "All personnel secure. Get us out." The helicopter lifted, rotors screaming, and we climbed fast out of the valley. Below, I could see headlights in the distance. The enemy patrol. They'd missed us by minutes. My father sat across from me in the helicopter, still holding his ribs, still quiet. He was looking at my squad, at Diaz who'd stabilized him, at Kim who'd supported his weight without complaint, at Washington who was calmly coordinating our return with air traffic control, at me, the team leader he didn't recognize. I wondered what he was thinking, whether his beliefs about women in combat were cracking under the weight of what he'd just experienced, or whether he'd find a way to reframe this, to explain it away, to preserve the narrative he'd built about female soldiers being liabilities instead of assets. The flight back took 40 minutes. Medical was waiting when we landed. They took my father and the other injured straight to triage. My squad debriefed, filed reports, turned in gear. Standard protocol. Nothing about this rescue was unusual for us. We'd done 12 similar extractions in the past 6 months, saved 34 lives. Perfect record. This was what we did. Later, after the adrenaline faded and I was alone in my bunk, I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from my mom. 2 texts asking if I'd heard about Dad's plane going down, if I knew anything, if he was safe. I called her back. "Mom, I heard. Is he okay?" She sounded exhausted. "He's stable. Broken ribs, some cuts. They're keeping him overnight for observation, but he'll be fine. He was so lucky. The rescue team got there so fast. He said they were incredible, all of them." I closed my eyes. "That's good. I'm glad he's safe. He keeps talking about them. The soldiers who pulled him out. Said they moved like they'd done it 1,000 times. He seems, I don't know, different. Quieter. Trauma does that," I said carefully. "I'm sure he'll process it all once he's home." We hung up. I sat in the dark, thinking about how close I'd come to telling her. To saying I was there, I led that extraction. It was my squad who saved him. But that would have defeated the purpose. My father needed to come to his own conclusions about women in combat. Without knowing his daughter had been the proof, I documented the mission like I always did. Timestamps, grid coordinates, personnel involved, actions taken, added it to the file. 35 successful rescues. 0 casualties among rescue teams. Commendations from 3 different commanding officers. Proof that existed independently of my father's opinion. 2 weeks later, I was back at my parents' house on leave. My father's ribs were still wrapped, bruises fading from purple to yellow. He moved carefully, but he was recovering well. We sat in the living room after dinner. My mom asked about deployment. I gave the usual vague answers. Training, routine patrols, nothing too dangerous. My father was quiet through most of the conversation. Then, out of nowhere, he spoke. "The team that pulled us out of that crash," he said, looking at his hands. "They were professional, efficient. I've never seen anything like it." I kept my face neutral. "That's good. Sounds like you got lucky with a good unit." "They were all women," he said. The room went still. My mom looked at him, then at me. I sipped my water, said nothing. "I didn't realize it at first," he continued. "Everything was happening so fast. But afterward, in the helicopter, I looked around. The medic, the communications specialist, the team leader, every single one of them was a woman. And they were..." He paused, searching for words. "Flawless. They secured a hostile site, treated casualties and extracted 7 people in under an hour. No mistakes, no hesitation, just professional excellence." I set my glass down carefully. "Sounds like they knew what they were doing." "They did," he said firmly. "And I've been thinking about that, about what I've said, about women in combat roles, about..." He looked at me. "About you." My mom reached for his hand. "Honey, what are you trying to say?" "I was wrong," he said quietly. "I've been wrong for a long time. I thought women in infantry, in combat, it was political correctness, lowering standards. I thought it put everyone at risk. But those soldiers saved my life, and they did it better than any team I've ever seen. Gender didn't matter. Competence did. And they were competent." I felt something shift in my chest. Not triumph, not vindication. Relief, maybe. Understanding. "That's a big realization, Dad." "I owe you an apology," he said. "I've said things, At dinners, at family events. I've questioned your career, your abilities, your place in the military. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. My mom's eyes filled with tears. I looked at my father, this man who'd spent years dismissing my service, and saw genuine remorse. I appreciate that, I said carefully. It means a lot. I want to do better, he said. I want to support you the way I should have from the beginning. I want to understand what you do, who you are as a soldier, if you'll let me. I nodded. I'd like that. We talked for another hour. He asked questions about training, about deployment, about my squad. I answered what I could without revealing classified information, and I didn't tell him the truth, not because I wanted to punish him, not because I needed him to feel guilty, but because the point wasn't about me. It was about changing his understanding of women in combat, broadly, systemically, permanently. If he knew I'd been the one who saved him, he might rationalize it as an exception, his daughter being extraordinary instead of women soldiers being capable. By keeping my role quiet, I let him believe he'd been saved by random female soldiers, which meant he had to confront the fact that competent women were everywhere in the military, not exceptions, not anomalies, standard. Over the next year, our relationship changed. He started asking about my deployments with genuine interest. He stopped making comments about women in combat. He started correcting other people when they questioned female soldiers' capabilities. He became, slowly, an advocate. At family gatherings, when someone would mention women in the military, he'd tell the story of his rescue, how they'd moved with precision, how they'd saved his life without hesitation, how gender had been irrelevant in the face of their competence. I'd listen, and I'd stay quiet. Let him have the story. Let him use it to change minds, including his own. 18 months after the rescue, I received a commendation for sustained excellence in combat operations. The ceremony was on base, closed to civilians. But I mentioned it to my mom. She told my father. He called me that evening. I wish I could be there, he said. I'd like to see them recognize what you do. It's routine stuff, Dad. Nothing dramatic. I doubt that, he said. You're too good for routine. That stopped me. My father had never called me good at anything military-related. Thanks, Dad. I mean it, he said. I don't know the details of what you do over there. I know you can't tell me most of it, but I know you're excellent at it. Because you were trained by excellent people. And you are excellent people. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of those words. I appreciate that. I love you, he said. I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago. After we hung up, I sat in my quarters and let myself feel everything I'd kept contained for 3 years. The frustration of being dismissed, the patience required to wait for proof instead of arguing, the discipline to stay silent when I wanted to scream that I'd been the one who saved him. And then I opened my laptop and updated the file. 37 successful rescues, 2 commendations, 0 casualties, perfect record. Proof that existed whether my father knew about it or not. 6 months later, I was invited to speak at a symposium on women in combat. The invitation mentioned that a guest would be in attendance, a civilian who'd been rescued by an all-female squad and wanted to share his perspective on female soldiers' capabilities. I knew it was my father before I saw the roster. He attended the symposium, sat in the front row, listened to 4 female soldiers describe their combat experiences. When it was time for questions, he stood. I'm not military, he said, but I was rescued by an all-female squad 18 months ago. Before that experience, I didn't believe women belonged in combat roles. I thought it was political, not practical. I was wrong. And I want to ask these soldiers what advice they'd give to people like me, civilians who don't understand what you do, who question whether you should be doing it. One of the other panelists answered first, talked about performance metrics, standards, training. Then they looked at me. Sergeant Martinez, what would you add? I thought about my father sitting there, not knowing he was asking his own daughter this question. I'd say don't take our word for it, I said. Look at the record, mission success rates, casualty statistics, after-action reports. The data shows that well-trained soldiers perform well regardless of gender. We're not asking people to believe in us based on faith. We're asking them to look at evidence. And if they do that honestly, the conclusions are clear. My father nodded, sitting down. After the panel, he came up to me. We were in a crowded room, other soldiers and guests mingling. He didn't know we'd met before. "Thank you for your service," he said, extending his hand. "What you do matters." I shook his hand. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." "My daughter's in the infantry," he said. "Deployed right now, actually. Hearing you speak made me understand her better. Made me proud." "I'm sure she knows that," I said carefully. He smiled. "I hope so. I'm trying to make sure she does." He walked away. I watched him go. And I still didn't tell him. Not because I wanted to keep the secret forever, but because the moment wasn't right yet. He was still learning, still processing, still adjusting his worldview. Telling him now would center the story on me, on our relationship, on individual redemption. The story needed to stay bigger than that. 3 years after the rescue, I rotated back stateside. My father met me at the airport, my mom beside him. He hugged me carefully, respectfully, like I was someone who'd earned his regard. Over dinner that night, he asked if I'd kept in touch with anyone from my deployment. "Some of my squad," I said. "We stay connected." "The women you served with," he said. "Are they like you, dedicated?" I smiled slightly. "We're all different, but yeah, dedicated, professional." "I'd like to meet them someday," he said. "If that's possible, I'd like to thank them for what they do." "Maybe someday," I said. The truth sat between us, invisible. I'd saved his life. My squad had proven everything he'd once doubted, and he'd changed his entire belief system because of it, without ever knowing the connection. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I thought about whether I'd ever tell him, whether he needed to know, whether it mattered. I decided it didn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because the point was never about my father acknowledging me. It was about him acknowledging the truth. And he had. He'd done the work of changing his mind, confronting his biases, becoming an advocate for people he'd once dismissed. That was more valuable than any personal recognition. The file on my laptop had grown. 42 rescues, 4 commendations, 2 years leading a squad that had never lost a team member or failed a mission. Evidence that existed independently of his knowledge. Proof that didn't need his validation to be real. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, if you've ever had someone dismiss your capabilities because of who you are instead of what you can do, I want you to know something. You don't owe them an argument. You don't owe them proof performed on demand. You owe yourself documentation, evidence. A record that speaks when you choose to stay silent. My father changed because he experienced undeniable proof. Not because I convinced him, because reality did. Sometimes the best way to change someone's mind is to be so good at what you do that when they finally pay attention, there's no room left for doubt. Have you ever had to prove yourself to someone who doubted you? Would you have stayed silent the way I did? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. This is one, and we share stories like this every day. Stories about patience, proof, and the moment when doubt becomes respect. If you don't want to miss the next one, subscribe to one and stay with us. Let's keep proving what we're capable of, together.